Okay guys, we're back with video number 2, and this is still working on 7-2, working off your highlighted sheet that has been posted, and it comes from the OpenStock books. Remember, everybody has to do the red dots and the highlighted ones, and honors, you have to do all of those plus the starred ones. Okay, number 14, it says just simplify. Okay, this one's a little different, but nothing we can't handle, because we do not have formulas for the angle sum and difference that deal with the cofunctions, right? The reciprocal functions. So we're just going to have to do what we know to convert it to something we can use. So just remember, okay, well, I know for a fact that cosecant is equal to 1 over sine. So all we have to do is put that into play and say, okay, this is now equal to 1 over the sine of pi over 2 minus little angle t. Okay, in the next step, we're going to break this out and we're going to use our formula for sine of alpha minus beta. Okay, so the formula for sine of alpha minus beta is going to be this guy. All right, so sine of our first angle times cosine of our second minus cosine of our first times sine of our second. Okay, and this is my alpha and this is my beta. Okay, so we're just going to write it as such. 1 over, this equals sine of pi over 2, okay, times cosine of t, angle t, and then we're going to have our minus sign, and now we go cosine based on the formula. It is now cosine of my alpha angle, or my first angle. The first angle is alpha, okay, and that's going to be multiplied by the sine of my beta angle. Okay, so now we're just going to convert these values into usable numbers. So the sine of pi over 2, well, you know your unit circle, and pi over 2 is right at 90 degrees. So that's going to be 1 times cosine of t. That's all we can do with that. Minus, we're still downstairs. Okay, this is the denominator. There's my upstairs numerator of 1. Okay, and then you're going to say the cosine of pi over 2. Well, the cosine of pi over 2 is 0, and that's going to be over sine of t. So you're subtracting 0 times sine t, so that's just going to be 0. So what we're left with then, I'm going to circle the entire fraction, okay, and I'm going to change colors. So in green, we're going to come up here and say we are left with 1 upstairs over 1 times cosine t minus 0. So that's simply going to be cosine t, which is equal to secant t. All right, so for your cofunctions, you're simply going to use the reciprocal. Okay, use the reciprocal and just transfer the given problem downstairs to the reciprocal function of that particular ratio. Okay, so there's that one. Hold please. All right, number 17 on your highlighted sheet. It says tangent of pi over 2 minus x. That's the same thing, say a tangent of your alpha minus your beta angle. So that's going to lead us to this formula here, tangent of alpha minus beta. So that's this guy. So we're just going to substitute in everything, and we're replacing alpha and beta with pi over 2 and x respectively. Okay, so we're going to write this. Hold on. Okay, guys, I had to stop for a second and relook at this. Okay, tangent pi over 2 minus x. We have a problem here. If we split this out and we use the tangent of a minus b, then you're going to be telling me you're going to find the tangent of pi over 2. Well, the tangent of pi over 2 is undefined. So we can't be putting tangent of pi over 2 into our formula if it's an undefined value. So scratch that. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to turn everything into terms of sine and cosine. We're going to rebuild the problem doing exactly that. All right, so we're going to say upstairs we have the sine of pi over 2 minus x. So that's the case with anything that's undefined. You're going to have to restructure it in terms of something that ties into right here, but is also not undefined. So if we put tangent pi over 2 there, you'd say, okay, it's undefined. I'm using in my simplification. You can't do that. All right, so pi over 2 minus x over, because tangent is sine over cosine, right? So tangent equals sine over cosine. So we're just restructuring the problem and we're using sine over cosine. Okay, and then it's going to be the cosine of pi over 2 minus x. Okay, so according to the formula, we basically now have the sine of alpha minus beta over the cosine formula for alpha minus beta. All right, so that's what we're going to structure. Okay, if we take this here, and this is my alpha, and this is my beta, and I use sine of alpha minus beta, here's what I'm going to have. I'm going to have sine of pi over 2 times the cosine of x, which is my beta angle, and then I'm going to have minus in the middle, that's the sine formula for difference, angle difference. All right, and then I'm going to have, after the subtraction, the rest of the formula says it's going to be the cosine of my first angle, which is pi over 2, times the sine of my second angle, which is x. Okay, that's the top formula. All right, now let's take care of the bottom formula. The bottom formula is going to read like this. Cosine of pi over 2 times cosine x. Don't start crossing out right now. This is part of a binomial. Okay, I know you're tempted. And then that's going to be a plus due to the cosine of alpha minus beta. And then my second two terms over here are going to be sine pi over 2 times sine of x. All right, so we just simply converted it into terms of sine over cosine because that is tangent. Okay, now let's see what we've got here. Here's my fraction bar. Let's take a look at this guy. Well, the sine of pi over 2 is 1. Cosine of x, you're just going to bring that term down. All right, subtract from that the cosine of pi over 2. Well, the cosine of pi over 2 is 0, and you're going to multiply that by sine x. Downstairs, okay, we're going to have, let me make a little arrow. Okay, cosine of pi over 2 is 0, and that's going to be times cosine x. And then we're going to have the plus. I'm just following this here. Sine of pi over 2 is 1, and that's going to be times the sine of x. Okay, all I did is I went and simplified in for each of these. All right, now we're going to simplify even further. Okay, some of these get a little long, I get it, but it's not hard. Okay, so if we look at what we have here, okay, all we have to do is simplify it now. So we're going to have equals, well, 1 times the cosine of x is cosine of x. And then up here, minus 0, so I got nothing else, right? And then I have over here, I have 0 plus sine of x, which leaves me with sine of x. Well, cosine divided by sine is cotangent x. Okay, so that's using these angle sum and difference identities. Now remember, if you have an undefined value for a given ratio, a trig ratio, and it's undefined, then you've got to flip it in terms of something else. Okay, so you got to make sure you recognize that tangent is undefined at pi over 2, so we had to shift it to something else. Okay, so there's that one. Stand by. Okay, here's number 18 on the same highlighted sheet. Now the instructions basically say simplify, nothing else, just simplify it. So now you see we're working a little bit backwards here. We have a full out expanded sum and difference formula, but we have to find the identity that fits this pattern so we know which of these guys that we're supposed to use. Okay, so sometimes it might be helpful if you did like alpha, beta, and that's alpha, and that's beta. Okay, and then you're going to recognize that you've got a sine and a cosine in the left half, and then you've got a cosine sine in the same position. So it's not going to be one where you have cosine, 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 sine, sine. So it's not one of the cosine formulas. All right, it's definitely not one of the tangent formulas. So it's either going to be this guy or this guy. Well, the key to making that distinction is looking at your middle sign. Okay, so in the sine formulas, you're going to recognize that the given alpha plus beta doesn't change when you expand it. So it stays the same. So that tells me that we're going to be looking at this formula, sine of a minus b, because look at the pattern. Sine of a times cosine of b, sine of a times cosine of b, minus cosine of a and sine of b. But instead of a and b, we have 2x and 5x as our angles. Okay, so this is what it actually is. It's actually, and this is pretty simple, it matches the pattern sine A minus B. Okay, it matches that pattern. So all we have to do is say, okay, it's going to be the sine. Well, my alpha is 2x, right? Minus my beta is 5x. So in fully simplified form, it's simply going to be sine of negative 3x. All right, so pick the pattern that it matches, plug in your alpha and your beta, and then just give me a result, a simplified result of what the sum of the angles or the difference of the angle will be. So that's pretty simple. So I don't want you to overthink those, okay? All right, you can do number 19. I know it's the same. All right, moving on. All right, guys, they're starting to get a little more interesting here. You know what? I'm going to start another video because this one requires some explanation. It's a little more involved. Okay, so I'm going to end this one and I'll be back with the next one.